Let me ask you something. Are you an individual? Of course you are. But do you know what you're saying? Right? Look at it. Today is what, Friday. So what would you call this period that's been and this period that's coming? You would say week, weekend, correct? Now you don't know what you're saying. I don't speak slave. So for me this is a strength and a strengthened. But even that is a trap in itself because it's strengthened even though it's strengthened. You see what I'm saying? Now getting back to the individual, you think that means someone who is unique, someone who is special, someone who stands on their own too. But in reality it means something entirely different and far more pernicious because it's inwardly divided and dual. Tell me that doesn't describe you perfectly. How many times have you said, oh, I don't know what came over me? Or how many times have you looked at someone and says, she's a completely different person when she's... You see what I'm saying? These are the roles that are fighting for your soul because they're in you and you don't realize you ain't them. It's like you're walking around in this world wearing a you mask, thinking that it's you. I mean, consider this. People are getting plastic surgery to look at their selfies, right? Selfies, the lens on the camera distorts your image due to its focal length, so you don't actually look like that. But people are so enamored with this normalized narcissism that's all around us these days that they want to look like their image. It's the same thing like when you see people on social media, they're not actually showing you their lives, they're exemplifying their brand. They're trying to sell you something, which is like, I hope you believe it and then give me your money, right? We'll get into this when we get into Trojan horse, because I'll cover all of this in full detail and you see it because the game is right in front of you, but it's designed to be seductive. It's designed to pull you in. And this is what I call the dual reality principle, where you think it's one thing when in reality it's another. A while ago, I went to go see a magician, and one of the tricks that really stood out in my mind, he was a mentalist, so it wasn't really done with like props, it was all done in the head, is he called for a volunteer from the audience and then said, they were sitting at this table and he said, close your eyes, do all this, and the girl had her hand on the table and he was pointing at it and he says, when I do this, you're going to feel a pressure lift and suddenly your hand will begin to float. So he points at her finger, she's got her eyes closed, she can't see it, and at the exact moment he starts pointing his finger, her hand floats up just like he's controlling it. Now that blew my mind, because I couldn't understand what he'd done. I couldn't figure out how the game had been played. And then I looked into it, and what he was actually doing was when she came and sat at the table, he put his shoe on her foot. So he was applying pressure. So when he said to her, when you feel the pressure lift, your arm will start to float, she didn't have a clue about any of this, and she just went along with it because she was happy to be picked out on stage. People who are in this game, they know that, so they pick out someone who's going to conform anyway, right? Anyone who's automatically volunteering, you can tell from the look of them, you can start gauging certain reactions, and you think this person's going to play along. And that's exactly how it worked. That's why they say, when you find out the nature of the trick, you automatically sit there and go, is that it? Really? And this goes back to what I told you about words being weapons. Because words are weapons and thoughts are things, right? Whatever you think in here happens out here, slowly. It's like a boomerang. It flies around. That's why winners win and losers lose. Whiners always find something to whine about, and lucky people always come up with the next win, even when they're not trying to. It's just right there in front of them. That's the way it is. And that is why I say to you, imagine if all of your life, to the point where you stand now, instead of being weakened, you've been strengthened. You see what I'm saying, right? This is all about spells and rites. And this all leads down to, what do you really know about yourself? What do you really know about the world? What do you really know about the game of souls? I'll be willing to bet every single thing that you think you know is an illusion, because the problem you're going to have is not the fact that, well, it's not the ignorance is part of it. Right? The ignorance is what keeps you where you're at, because you're familiar in your misery and it's a velvet lined rut. But the problem you're going to have is the illusion of wisdom. It's what you think you know that prevents you from learning what you don't know you don't know. Think about that. It's a game of three halves, you know what I mean? Because you've got what you know, and what you know, you don't know. But what you don't know, you'd never even considered until this moment. And this is what I'm saying. right? There's far more to all of this because, okay, going back to the three, you've heard people say, when someone gets some shocking news, they're like, oh, they clutch their pearls, right? Or you get the butterflies in your stomach, right? Or my gut feeling, do you know what I mean? Or so-and-so was buzzing around in my head and then I went and saw them later on that day just out of the blue, right? These are what I call the three kingdoms. You have immense energy centers inside of you. You are, as a matter of fact, the creator and ruler of this. But you're much like an absentee landlord because you're nowhere to be seen. You can't bring harmony to this inside if you don't know how it works. And they're not going to teach you how it works. Why would they teach you how it works when this is what they use to rule you? They keep you in the darkness like a shroom and they feed you BS. But that same shroom can be the tool of enlightenment if you know how to use it correctly. And this is what I'm going to share with you. I mean, you try it yourself. If you ask anyone where do they feel they are most in their body, they'd say that they think they're behind their eyes. Now, if I ask you to feel into your chest, you won't be able to do it. If I ask you to feel into your belly, they might as well not exist. You don't have the level of neural feedback that you require because you're isolated from these aspects. There is a reason why we do this and this. Think about it. Think about what this represents when it comes to the divide between mind and body, because they really are just one continuum. But you've been taught to break it down into pieces, break it down into pieces, break it down into pieces. You edit the story of your own life. And I'll be willing to bet that most of you are like facing the crowd number 480 in your own movie. That's the nature of the game. If you're playing somebody else's game, you can never be the star because you're their pawn. You're their lame. You do what they say. And that's how it works. Because it all comes down to who are you really? Do you know what I mean? If you look in the mirror and you think, that's me, nobody else on the planet sees that face because the mirror flips it around. What you think is left is actually right. If your face is twisted that way and the mirror is twisted that way, that's why people were freaking out when camera phones first came out, because they're looking at their faces and thinking, do I look like that? And now that same thing is what they want to look like. Tell me that humanity isn't crazy. Tell me I'm not the only one that can see the madness that's going on around. Come on, you know that you're seeing it, right? Because you don't know about these three kingdoms, because you've got no knowledge yourself, because all you know is the ignorance that the system poured into your head, right? It's like this. Imagine if I give you a car and you're taught how to drive, and it's a manual, so you've got a clutch, brake, accelerator. The thing is, you're only taught that there's first gear and reverse, right? So all around the world, people are screaming around in first gear, and then they wonder why their vehicle is interesting to note the ancient Egyptians called the body the car. Isn't it funny that they thought that the car drives the flesh, and we use the flesh to drive cars? You see what I'm saying? It's all about words. Words are weapons if you don't know how to use them right. Now, you're driving around in first gear, and you've never actually thought, well, hang on a second, if I put the clutch in to go to first gear, why don't I put it in again and look for the second gear? Because you haven't been taught to look for it. Because you haven't been taught to look for it, it might as well not exist. There are functions and things that this can do that will blow your mind. Compared to the problems, compared to the way the people were back then, the problems that we have now is because everyone is functionally retarded and they think that they're great. They think that they've got it going on and they think that they're smart. But that's the con. That's the way the game works, right? If you could go back 13,000 years with your intellect, people would look at you and be like, what is this baboon? This circus animal? This cannot be human, right? This is where the legends come of the fall of man, where they say that we used to be great. Why do you think this era is called mankind? Kind of like man? You know what I mean? You start to do the math, right? And this is all that it comes down to. They're not going to tell you this, right? For the simple fact that the slave masters who run this game have a vested interest that's exceedingly profitable in keeping you ignorant. There's a hole that everyone feels inside. They don't want to acknowledge it, but it's there. They were born, they felt complete, they got older, something happened, and they don't quite feel the same anymore. And they think, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll get rich, then I'll be happy. I'll have loads of sex, then I'll be happy. I'll buy all these shiny things, then I'll be happy. I'll get 1 million followers on Instagram, then I'll be happy. And none of these things work. None of these things work, right? Nobody wants to do what's functional. I used to be like that. I wanted to be rich. I had all these shiny things and all that and the other. And then I sat there one day and I thought, well, hang on a second, this crap isn't really working. Because all this crap is doing is making me work for more of it. And I turned my senses around and I looked in. So intentionally trying to fill that hole, I reached into it and see what I could find. And by going into the dark, I met enlightenment. Because that's the only way it can be. It's a tough and lonely journey, but you're the only one that can do it. But the thing is, if you do it, the implications for the world are immense. One of the most common things I've heard, I mean, I've probably talked to hundreds of thousands, if not a million people in my life, because I'm quite gregarious. And one of the things that almost all of them had said at some point during our conversation is, I've never met anyone like you before. And it made me think, well, hang on, what is the difference? What is the difference between me and them? And this ties in very nicely to something I'm going to share later on when we get into the subject of mental health and the sane walker and what all of this means. Because in reality, the whole world is mad. The paranoid schizophrenic is the only one that truly gets it, and the only sane reaction to a crazy society is to lose your mind, because it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a society that is profoundly sick. And you look at the world and tell me that isn't what it is, right? Do you want to be like that? Why would you want to run a race that ends in a trap? Why do you want to play a game where the only thing that you can win is that you lose? There is nothing to win here. We're literally in the land of the lost. But people don't want to see it. They don't want to see it because they don't want to believe it, right? The five senses are actually the five thieves. They're deceptive. There is a reason why, okay, I'll give you an example. All religious books are written in code, right? People read the surface and they think, ooh, this is what it is, and then they believe it, but they don't get it, right? Case in point, Jesus was crucified in Golgotha with two thieves. What does that mean? Golgotha is Latin for skull, right? Two thieves are the hemispheres of your brain. Your awareness, once balanced and in the middle, that is your high level of consciousness, right? The facts I'm kicking, people have came before me and said the same things, but people didn't get it. They didn't get it. They didn't apply it, or it was twisted, or the language was changed. You know, there's been countless things about it. You know, and I don't... It's the reason why the slave masters are where they're at. It's the reason why they sit at the top of the pyramid and you're at the bottom. Because that structure is powerful for them. Whereas I'm all about the circle. No beginning, no end. It's all infinite. Not infinite, unfinite. Feel me? So we'll meet again.